Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Joe R. Vintage Pokemon here once again, and today we're going to be taking a look at some more Pokemon video game action, specifically some gold, crystal, and silver version for Pokemon, because if you're like me, if you love playing those games when you were a kid and you still like playing them today on the good old Game Boy, that's the way it was meant to be, and that's the way I like to play on them. But just like with red, blue, and yellow version, there's a small problem. And that's that inside each of these cartridges, there's a small internal battery, and that internal battery controls not just your save file, but in the case of gold, silver, and crystal, also day-to-day events in the form of a small internal clock. And when that battery runs dry, so does the ability to do all of those things involving both the clock and saving your game. So we're going to talk about how to actually open these cartridges up, change that small internal battery so you can keep playing this game for another 10 to 15 years to come. And we're going to do all that with the help of our video game master mechanic. So stay tuned. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy this kind of content, and come back next time for more great Pokemon card or video game content action. Thanks a lot, guys. Alright, so we're here with our video game master mechanic, George, and he's going to walk us through exactly how we're going to be changing out the batteries in these games today.
Alright, so first thing you're going to need are the batteries themselves. All the Pokemon games, aside from Pokemon Yellow, use the CR 2025 pre-tab battery. I always suggest getting the wide tabs, as the thin tabs are used for the Super Nintendo games and N64 games, and you won't necessarily get as good of contact on these games. The next thing you will need, solely for Pokemon Yellow, a CR 1616 battery, which is significantly smaller in size, but still gives out 3 volts, and it works for the game. Aside from the batteries themselves, a few things you will need are a 3.8 security nut driver, and this is specifically to remove the screws on the back of the games. There are ways around this, but this is the cleanest, safest way to do it without causing damage to the back of the cartridge. The next thing you will need is a soldering iron. I have a Hako soldering iron. It served me well over the past year. You don't need anything as expansive as this. You could get something run-of-the-mill from your local hardware store, and it will do the job. Next thing you will also need is solder itself. I suggest a fine filament solder, but something a little wider will work as well. But with the finer filament, it burns, it melts a lot quicker, and you are able to get a little more precision out of your work. Some things that also help that aren't needed is a solder wick itself. It's a copper strand that allows you to soak up some of the old solder. I don't like to work with old solder. I will remove as much of it as I possibly can and put fresh solder down. If solder heats up multiple times, it can fail and start to crack, and then you will have problems down the line. If you don't want to use a solder wick, you can go out and get yourself a desoldering pump. A little more expensive, but does the job well. It acts just like a soldering iron. You plug it in, let it heat up. There is a bulb on the backside that you would squeeze, and as you release after heating up the solder, you will suck some of it up. It is good for larger jobs. The filament itself is much better suited for this.
Thanks a lot, George. You learned by doing, so let's change some batteries, guys.
Alright, so we're back doing Pokemon Crystal. So, like Pokemon Yellow, first thing we got to do is take out that security screw in the back using a 3.8mm security nut driver. Take that out. Remember, slide the front down and you can pop it right off. And here we have Pokemon Crystal, and for a nice side-by-side, here is Pokemon Yellow, the one that we did last time.
And you'll notice the battery is different inside these two.
Yes. Pokemon Yellow uses a CR 1616 pre-solder tab battery, while Pokemon Crystal will use a little larger CR 2025, which the bulk of Game Boy games use.
For the record, George, does red and blue version have to use CR 1616?
They have to use CR 2025.
They could use 1616, but it's preferred to use 2025.
Yes, they could. If you line it up, everything could work out, but the original battery was a CR 2025, so you just want to stick with original equipment as much as you possibly can. So, first thing we're going to do is take the chip out, because you don't ever want to solder it while it's inside the plastic cartridge, because you will probably melt that. Get our solder wick. And we are going to start desoldering. We'll start with the positive side.
And all we're doing, guys, is picking up some of that old solder.
Because we're going to put fresh solder down. Why keep the old solder?
You don't have to do this. You could actually use that old solder that's there, but just to keep things as clean as possible, we're going to take that old solder up.
And we've had problems with other games in the past with using batteries that were a little subpar and possibly questionable solder joints by other people that I had to repair, so we're going to do this as best we can, as clean as we can. Now, when you buy your CR2025 batteries, there's two kinds you can get with pre-tabbed. You'll see that the top battery itself has pins, while the bottom battery is the one that is preferred, which has a wider tab. The top one is actually meant for Super Nintendo games and N64 games because you're able to bend the tabs forward and place it inside of the board and solder it. When you solder this to a Game Boy game, you get very little contact on a pin connector, and if you drop the game or it has a lot of torque and moving, you will break the connection and the battery is garbage, and you will lose your save. So we're going to use the much more preferred wider tab. So we're going to get our solder ready. Let's just clean up a little bit more. This one has a little bit more solder I want to take up. All right, clean up the pads. All right, so we're going to line up our battery. You want to make sure positive goes to positive and negative goes to negative. They are marked on the board, so it's pretty easy and straightforward. You want to try to line it up so you get as much of each tab as possible on each side of the board. I'm going to use an alligator clip to hold everything together because I'm doing this by myself and it makes it a little easier to do the soldering. Now, when you're soldering, you always want to make sure you get a little bit of solder on the soldering iron first to get things started. So I'm going to heat up the pad and I'm going to slowly introduce solder till I get a nice coverage, which, there we go. Now I'm going to do the other side.
And how quickly is this solder dry?
Seconds. It's already dry.
Well, that makes it easy.
Very easy. Just be careful because you can easily burn yourself.
And we know you have.
Several times, several hundred times. And it's fine because I know what I'm doing, so if I burn myself, it's all right.
He can take it.
Mistakes happen. So you always want to, after soldering it, you always want to give it a little shimmy to make sure that the soldered tabs didn't come undone, you got good contact, and everything works. So now we can put everything back together and give this guy a test. Now these games, gold, crystal, and gold, crystal, and silver provide a in-game clock. So the battery has to be working at all times. So you want to make sure the battery you put in has been tested, which we did prior to doing this. It was giving out the appropriate voltage. So now we can give this guy a test.
Perfect. And what voltage is it supposed to put out?
3 volts.
Beautiful.
You usually read a little above 3 volts when testing the batteries, which is fine. A little below, because multimeters can vary. It might say 2.99. Unless you're running with a high-end Fluke, you might have some differences in decimal points. But so long as it's close to the number, everything will work.
Excellent. So let's throw this bad boy in the game, and we'll test it out. All right, so we got our game in. We started it on up. We started a new game to be more precise, so we're going to actually go ahead and save it. We're 2 minutes in. And the importance of this game is that it's got that internal clock that runs all the time as well. So we're going to turn it on off. And we'll turn it on back on. And we'll see if our game actually saved. And it did. Fantastic. Doctor, thank you very much for all your help today.
Doctor.
We enjoyed doing this battery replacement with you guys. Make sure you like and subscribe for more great Pokemon card, video game, whatever you want to do, action, and we'll see you on next time. Joe R out.